Hello students, as promised I'm doing a very quick video on how you can implement a basic version of shooting in the game that we've been working on in class. Again, this is by no means a complete shooting mechanism. There's quite a few things that you would probably still want to implement, and I might mention a few in a moment, but it will give you the basics at least. So what we're aiming for is we have our little player here that we can move around. We're now able to shoot in both directions, and if we were to shoot one of these blobs, these guys on the platform, not the cogs at the moment, if we were to shoot one of those guys, it should disappear. What you might notice is at the moment the bullet is going through that platform. That is certainly not something we would really want. We might want to implement it also on these cogs, and we might want to implement something that prevents the bullet from going through multiple enemies, which it might do at the moment. But let's have a look at how this was produced. Unlike some of the other videos I've done, I'm not going to be putting the code in as I go. I've already done that, and I'm just going to be explaining what has happened. So the first thing is I have created a new scene called that fireball, and it is an area 2D to begin with. As in most cases, I've then added a sprite, which is just this little fireball sprite that I have. Because of the size of my sprite was, I did scale it down to be half the size. It was a bit big initially. Of course, you could either draw it the correct size or scale it like I have if need be. I have a collision shape, which is just this circle collision shape. And I've also implemented a timer, and I've set that timer to be a one shot, so it only can be played once, and also at a 0.5 of a second duration. Now the timer is what's allowing my bullet to only travel for a certain amount of time, and I'll explain more about that as we go. I've then implemented a script onto this fireball, and it has the following. So the first thing is I have a direction, which I'm using an integer, and that's going to either be 1 or -1. And that is going to be important for deciding which direction the bullet is being shot in, and that will be set at the time that we create the bullet in the game, which we'll come to. I also have the speed that my bullet is traveling at. I've chosen a speed of 10. Of course, you could choose any speed that is suitable for you. And having a speed value like this is one way that you might potentially have different versions of your bullet. So you might have a power up that allows you to shoot a faster bullet, and therefore you could just change that value as needed for that bullet to work in the same way but go at a faster speed. So keeping values in variables is a good way to create the illusion at least of differences but not having to change a lot of code. Now this timer is here, so when the bullet is made and it is ready in our scene, we've talked about the ready before, then our timer gets started. So it starts counting down, and then at the end of the timer we have used the timer timeout signal, and I've connected that to this function here, which simply queue freeze or deletes the bullet. So basically that gives the option of our bullet existing in the game for 0.5 of a second, and then it is deleted. Okay, again, changing the length of that timer will determine how long your bullet stays alive before being deleted out of the game. And that is important that you do delete things like bullets, because if you just create them and let them go forever, if they don't hit anything else and get deleted for another reason, then they will continue off your screen and into the infinite space, and eventually you'll have so many bullets potentially in your game that it crashes your game. So it's what we might call tidying up or keeping things organized, that we do make sure that there is a way for our bullets to get deleted. And in this case I'm using a timer. It might also be things like if it goes outside the camera or off the screen or things like that. But in this case that's what the timer is doing. After half a second this timer happens, and I basically delete the bullet if it hasn't already happened. So that is essentially the script. Oh, sorry, and the process. So the process function here, of course, is it is changing the position, the X position. I'm talking about the global position. So that is where it is in the game, not in itself. So I'm changing the X position by the speed of the bullet multiplied by direction. So what we know is if you take this speed of 10 and you multiply it by 1, then you still get a speed of 10, and that will, in this case, increase our x, which means it'll move to the right-hand side. If we change the direction to -1, which is how we're going to use that value, and then I multiply that by 10, I have the effect of adding a negative number, which means our x will decrease, which means it'll move to the left-hand side. And that is how we are controlling the direction that our bullet is moving. By putting either a 1 or a -1 in that direction variable, we can control whether our bullet moves to the left or the right. So that's basically our bullet. You can copy that out if you would like. Now in my player, first of all, of course, I have already added a key value which I've called shoot in my project. So I went to project settings, I went to my input map, and I added a new action called shoot, which is down here, and I'm using the space bar. In this case, you can of course use any key or gamepad control button or anything else that you would like, but that's important to have that there. Now up the top of my player script, I have added in a facing variable, and that's just what I'm going to use later on to keep track of whether my character is facing to the left or the right. And you might have guessed that's going to become the value that I use to tell my bullet which way it should be going for its direction. I've also added in this onReady variable of a bullet, which is preloading in my fireball scene from before. So it already knows what a bullet, or in this case a fireball, should be. We've called that a bullet so that we can use it more quickly later on. It saves a very little bit of loading time when you need to make that bullet because it already knows what that is. Now, as I move down in my script, here is the code that we were using to determine which direction our sprite was facing when we move. So if our velocity is facing one direction, we were flipping the sprite, etc. And what I've done is I've added in a value for facing, that new variable I just added in. And the reason I'm doing that here is I'm already doing the check to determine whether my sprite is left or right. So instead of having to do the same check again later on when I shoot my bullet, I've now set my variable. So if I've flipped my horizontal, that means I'm now facing my sprite to the left. I'm also changing my facing value to -1. If my horizontal flip of my sprite is false, i.e. it's facing to the right, its normal position, then I set facing back to be 1. So I can use that value later on, okay? Here is my input for shooting. So I'm just checking if the input for shoot has just been pressed. And if it has, I've chosen to fire the bullet in its own function. That way I can make changes if need be later on. So I just say, hey, go and call this function called fire bullet, which happens to be just below. Now this is where the magic, if you like, of the bullet happens. So the first thing is we're getting a link, if you like, to our main scene. So basically our game scene. So we're just getting the current scene from the tree. That's important for adding in a second. And this line here is where we create the bullet. So we're creating a temporary variable in this function called new bullet, and we're saying it's equal to the bullet that we talked about at the top that we've preloaded dot instance, which means create a new one of. We then use that main scene from above to add a child. So we're adding a node automatically. So it's like adding one of these nodes in here that we normally press plus and choose a node. We're now doing that using code. We are adding a child to the main scene. So it would be just directly under the main scene. And the child is this new bullet that we just instanced above here. We're then setting the global position to be the same as our sprite. Okay, so the sprite of the play, we're getting its position, and we're saying, hey, this new bullet we just made, also make its position the same. And I've chosen global position instead of the actual player's position, because that will be its position within the whole game window, not the position within the player. It's one of those things you just got to probably trust at the moment that that's the right way to do it. You can try, if you just do new bullet dot position, see what happens. You'll probably find that it doesn't quite work the way you expect, but have a go, see what happens. And then finally here we're saying, hey, take that new bullet again and set its direction value. So we saw that variable in the bullet itself, in the fireball, to be the value of facing that we were using up here. And that's how we're passing either that 1 or -1 to control the way the bullet is moving. Okay, so far we have created the fireball scene that we can use. We've now instanced that fireball scene here when we press the spacebar, in my case, the shoot button, and we've set it on its merry way. It is moving through the scene. The last thing we needed to do is to take our enemy blob scene, and we needed to do something about detecting when the fireball, the bullet hits that enemy. So we already have a function earlier here that says on the area player collision. So when the body enters this object, we can detect if it's the player, and if it is, we are telling it to die. We're doing a similar thing, but this time with an area entered. So I went to signals and I went to the area entered, because our fireball, remember, is an area 2D. It's not a body. It's not a kinematic body. So because an area, we needed to set up this, up here, we needed to set up this signal, which came down here. Ignore this print. I put that in for testing. I'll just take that out. Now, this is a little bit special. What I'm saying here is if the word fireball, which is what we have called our actual scene up here for the fireball, is in the name of the area. This area is created here because something's entered it. Name just means get the name of what was entered in. Now, the reason I've used fireball in, we're looking for that word inside, is that every time we make a new instance in the game, it's not just called fireball. It will be fireball number 15, fireball number 2, fireball #3. It basically gets a bit of a random value added to the word fireball to distinguish it from a different fireball, because we might have several in our game at any moment because we've been hitting the shoot button quite rapidly. So we can't just say if it equals fireball, because there probably isn't one called fireball. It's going to have something else added to it. So that in command, which we have seen in Python, that we have probably done a little bit earlier in our schooling at our school anyway, base says if anywhere in that word, that name in this case, is the word fireball, then it's going to match. And the two things I'm doing if it does find a match is, first of all, I am keyfraying or deleting the area that just collided. That is the bullet in this case. Okay, so the bullet's what's colliding here that's triggering this function. I've detected it does have the word fireball in its name, so therefore it must be a type of fireball. So I'm keyfraying or deleting the fireball from the scene. Okay, we don't want the fireball to go through the enemy to another one. We want to delete it. And then straight after that, I'm also keyfraying this enemy, because remember, we are in the enemy script at the moment. So just saying keyfree by itself means delete this object or this instance, which is the enemy. So that effectively deletes the bullet and the enemy at the same time. And that is what we needed to do to make this work. So again, if I quickly run the game to have another look at it, what we saw is we can shoot. As we move our player to left or right, we're temporarily changing that facing variable. So if we shoot, we are passing that value across to our bullet. So that's how we get it to move in either the left or right direction. If we jump around while shooting, we get bullets that still keep moving in their correct direction. And of course, if we hit an enemy, it disappears as well. So as I said, a brief look at one way to implement a type of shooting. It is certainly by no means the most efficient way. There are many, many other ways you could implement shooting, including by using, by using kinematic bodies, instead of areas. That would have a different way of dealing with the movement. But for now, if you need to implement just a basic shooting mechanism into the game that we've been working on, then you can essentially replicate what I've done here, maybe with a few adjustments of your own. As always, I hope this has helped you in some way with your Godot development. If you're in one of my classes, again, you can ask for some assistance with this. If you're not, then again, I hope it has helped you.